Thanks for joining us tonight. We'd love to know where you're listening from and who you're sharing this moment with. Drop a comment below. If you enjoy a good scare before bed, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more nightly chills. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let the story begin. It was the summer of 2019, the kind of hot that makes your skin stick to the car seat, and you can't even breathe without tasting the dust. My wife, Elowen, and I were driving from Flagstaff, Arizona, to visit my uncle down in Tucson. We had our son, Riven, with us. He was 8 at the time, in the back seat playing on his Switch, eyes glued to the screen. We were trying to save time, so I took this back road, Bloody Basin Road, of all names, which should have been a red flag right there. The GPS had said it was a shortcut, and we were already late. By the time we got near the canyon, it was past 6 p.m., and the sun was dipping behind the red rocks, casting these long shadows that made everything look like it was moving. Elowen started getting that look, the one where she bites her lip and taps her nails against the window when she's worried. "Callum, maybe we should turn around. This road feels wrong," she said, her voice tight. I just laughed it off. "We'll be fine. We're making good time." Then Riven chimed in, eyes still locked on his game. "Dad, my friend Felix said people go missing out here." I snorted, shaking my head. "Yeah, and Felix also told you Santa Claus lives on Mars." We kept going, but something about that road was off. You could feel it, like the air was heavier, thicker. And then, just as we rounded a bend, there it was, Slaughterhouse Canyon. There was this little dirt trail off to the side with an old rusted sign, Luana's Lament, carved into it. Elowen swore under her breath. "This place gives me the creeps, Callum." As soon as we pulled over to stretch our legs, I felt it, a chill. In the middle of July, in the Arizona heat. It didn't make sense. But I didn't say anything, didn't want to freak Riven out. He'd already had his share of nightmares, and the last thing we needed was another sleepless night. We got out, and that's when I saw her, standing at the edge of the canyon, facing away from us. A woman, wearing this torn, blood-stained wedding dress, her long black hair blowing in the wind. I froze. "Elowen, do you see that?" She turned, eyes wide. "Who the hell?" But before I could say anything, Riven let out this ear-piercing scream. We whipped around, and he was staring at his reflection in the car window, eyes wide as dinner plates. "Dad, she's right behind us!" I spun around, and she was gone. Just like that. Vanished. My heart was pounding so hard, I could barely hear Elowen asking if I was okay. "It's nothing," I lied. "Probably just a shadow." But that wasn't it. We all knew it. We got back in the car, but it wouldn't start. Engine just sputtered and died. "Great," I muttered, slamming my fist on the wheel. Stupid rental. We sat there for a while, the silence pressing down on us. Elowen tried calling for help, but there was no signal. And that's when the wailing started. It was distant at first, almost like an echo, but it grew louder, like someone was right outside the car, sobbing. It was this gut-wrenching sound, full of grief and rage, and I could feel it in my bones. Riven covered his ears, tears streaming down his face. "Make it stop, Dad!" "I can't," I whispered. "I don't know how." I glanced at Elowen, and I could see the fear in her eyes. Real fear, not the kind you get from a scary movie or a ghost story. This was different. This was real. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and stepped out of the car. "Stay here," I told them, even though I didn't believe it was going to make a difference. The moment I stepped onto the dirt path, the wailing stopped, dead silent. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is anyone there?" And then I saw her again. The woman in the wedding dress, standing at the edge of the canyon, swaying back and forth like she was being blown by the wind. But there was no wind. I took a step closer, and that's when I noticed the blood. It was dripping from her hands, staining the white fabric, splattering onto the rocks below. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She turned, and I felt my heart stop. Her eyes, they were empty, hollow, like someone had scooped them out. And she opened her mouth, but instead of words, that wailing came pouring out, louder and louder until I thought my eardrums would burst. I stumbled back, tripping over a rock, and that's when I saw it. A tiny grave, half buried in the dirt. There was a small wooden cross, and scratched into it, in shaky letters, was the name Riven. "No, no, no, no," I stammered, crawling backward. "This isn't real. This isn't happening." Suddenly, the woman lunged, her face twisted into this horrible blood-stained grin, and everything went black. I woke up in the car, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my ears. Elowen was shaking me, her eyes wide with terror. "Callum, wake up! We have to go!" The engine roared to life, and we peeled out of there, leaving that damned canyon behind. We didn't stop until we reached a small motel on the outskirts of Phoenix, and even then, none of us could sleep. Riven wouldn't speak, wouldn't even look at us, just kept his head down, muttering to himself. The next morning, I took a good look at the car. There were scratch marks all along the side, like something had tried to claw its way in. And there, smeared across the back window, were bloody handprints. Small ones, like a child's. We never talked about it again, never told anyone what happened. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear that wailing again. And I'll see her, standing at the foot of my bed, that blood-stained dress swaying back and forth. But it was last week when I woke up to find Riven gone. Just gone. His bed was cold, the sheets crumpled, and there, lying on his pillow, was a wedding veil soaked in blood. We searched everywhere. The police think he ran away. But I know better. I know she took him. And every night I can still hear his voice calling out from the canyon. "Dad, please, come back." I've got the keys in my hand right now. I'm heading back to that canyon. Maybe I can bring him home. Maybe I can end this. But if you're reading this and you hear the wailing someday, don't go looking, because she'll be waiting for you too. I had always trusted my instincts. After all, living alone for years, just you and your dog, you learn to read the signs. That quiet house near the woods, it wasn't much, but it was home. I never thought anything could really shake me, until that night. It was early November, the kind of cold where your breath fogs up in front of your face and the trees sway in the wind, sounding like they're whispering secrets. The forecast had said it might snow, but it hadn't started yet. Just that biting chill in the air. It was around 11:30 p.m., late enough that the whole world felt dead. Max, my black lab, an 8-year-old dog I'd had since he was a pup, was outside in the yard, barking at something. Probably a deer. We had plenty of those around, and Max never missed an opportunity to chase one into the woods. The house itself was small, nothing fancy. A single-story home with chipped white paint, a porch that creaked when you walked on it, and a backyard that ran straight into a dense patch of forest. Sometimes, at night, when the wind blew just right, I could swear I heard strange noises out there, but I always wrote them off as animals. But that night, there was something different. Max's barking turned into this weird, high-pitched whimper. It was like he was scared or hurt, and then it stopped, just like that. Silence. At first, I thought maybe he'd chased something too far into the woods. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed out the back door. The backyard was dark, pitch black, really. The kind of dark where even the moon's light couldn't cut through the thick clouds overhead. I stepped onto the damp grass, shining my flashlight toward the trees. "Max?" I called. Nothing. I took a few more steps, my boots squelching in the mud. The wind picked up, and the trees rustled in that way they do, like they're alive. Every time I called his name, my voice felt smaller, like the woods were swallowing it whole. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving between the trees. Low to the ground. Fast. My heart skipped a beat. "Max?" The shape stopped. A moment later, Max emerged from the woods, walking slowly toward me. At first, I felt relieved. He was okay. But as he got closer, my gut twisted. There was something wrong. Something off. His walk was slower than usual, stiff, and his eyes, they looked darker, more hollow, like they weren't his eyes at all. Max had always been a happy dog, tail wagging, tongue hanging out. But this version of him just stood there, staring at me. No panting, no barking, just still, unnaturally still. I knelt down, reaching out to him. "Come here, boy." He hesitated for a second, then stepped forward, but his movements were jerky, like he was figuring out how to walk for the first time. His fur, which had always been sleek and smooth, now looked matted and greasy. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I led him inside, trying to shake the feeling that was clawing at my brain. Maybe he was just tired, or sick. Yeah, that had to be it. He must have eaten something bad in the woods. But as we stepped into the living room, he stopped again, right in the doorway, and just stared at me. No tail wagging, nothing. I tried to laugh it off. "You're acting weird tonight, Max. What's gotten into you?" Max's head tilted to the side like he was listening, really listening. Too much like a human. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy. It was too quiet in that house. The kind of quiet that presses in on your chest, making it hard to breathe. I flicked on the TV, trying to break the tension. Some random late-night show flickered on, filling the room with dull background noise. Max's eyes followed me as I sat down on the couch, never leaving me, like he was watching my every move. And then, out of nowhere, he did something he had never done before. He stood up on his hind legs. I swear to God, it was the most unnatural thing I'd ever seen. Like some twisted version of a dog trying to imitate a person. His movements were slow, jerky, like he was figuring out how his own body worked. He took a step toward me, wobbling like a newborn deer. My heart was hammering in my chest. "What the hell?" I backed up, pushing myself off the couch, my pulse racing. This wasn't Max. This couldn't be him. My mind raced, piecing together everything I'd heard about the woods, about skinwalkers, creatures that could take the shape of animals, but never quite get it right. They wore their skins like costumes, trying to blend in. And now, one was standing in my living room. The thing that looked like Max stared at me, its head tilting again in that same eerie way. I couldn't let it know I was onto it. I needed a plan. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I forgot I needed to grab some groceries." I reached for my keys, never taking my eyes off him. "I'll be right back, okay?" Max, or whatever the hell it was, just stood there, watching. I edged toward the door, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. I pulled the door open slowly, careful not to make too much noise. And then, just as I stepped outside, I heard it again. That same high-pitched whimper I'd heard earlier in the woods. But this time, it was louder, closer. I froze. It was coming from the woods again, and my stomach twisted in knots. Slowly, I turned my head toward the tree line. My breath caught in my throat. There, just beyond the trees, was Max, the real Max. His body was mangled, twisted in a way that no animal could survive. His fur was soaked in blood, his eyes wide open in a final expression of pain. He was lying there, broken, at the edge of the woods. The thing inside my house hadn't followed me. It was still inside. I could feel the cold air cutting through my skin, but I couldn't move. My eyes darted back to the house, where the light from the living room flickered out for just a second. And then, I heard it, a low, guttural growl behind me. Slowly, I turned back toward the house, and there it was. The thing that had pretended to be Max was standing in the doorway, its body hunched over in that grotesque, unnatural stance. But now, it wasn't even trying to look like a dog. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and its face twisted into something halfway between a snarl and a smile. It stepped forward, moving with a slow, deliberate pace. Every hair on my body stood on end. I didn't have time to think. I ran. I didn't look back. The woods, the road, my truck, it all blurred together as I sprinted for my life. But even as I fumbled for my keys, scrambling to start the engine, I could feel it. That thing. It was still watching me. I got the call on October 14th, 2023. Weird that I even remember the date, but some things just stick. It was around 7:30 p.m. My tiny apartment in downtown Monterey was barely holding on to any warmth. That damn fog had already rolled in thick, creeping through every crack. I was heating up a crusty slice of pizza, trying to shake off the boredom from my latest assignment, another fluff piece on local politics that no one cares about. I guess I should mention I'm Mark Jensen, freelance journalist. Not exactly a winning career, but it pays the rent when the rent's cheap. My phone buzzes on the counter, cutting through the hum of my microwave. It's Travis Baker, an old buddy from college. He works as a ranger up in the Santa Lucia Mountains, a job I figured was just his way of escaping life, you know. But that night, something was off. His voice was all jagged edges. "Mark, you there?" I could barely get a "yeah" out before he jumps in. "Man, people are disappearing up here. Hikers, campers. They're just gone." "Travis," I sigh, already picturing him overreacting about a bear attack or some weird weather pattern. Maybe they just got lost? I mean, these things happen. But then he says it. They saw something before they vanished. They're calling them the Dark Watchers. I felt that tug, the one that gets you when you think you're about to be a part of something big. "All right, I'm coming up," I said, before I even thought about it. By 9 p.m., I was throwing my stuff in my old beat-up pickup and heading down Highway 1, that same stretch of road I've driven 1,000 times. But this time, yeah, it felt different. More empty or something. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way the fog just swallowed everything, or maybe it was just in my head. I reached the trailhead close to midnight, and there's Travis, leaning against his truck like he's aged 10 years since we last saw each other. "You really came," he muttered, looking almost guilty. "Yeah, well, you sounded freaked out. Figured you needed some backup." I shrugged, but he just handed me a flashlight, not even cracking a smile. We hit the trail, and the air's damp, smells like wet leaves and something else, something metallic. Travis doesn't say much, just keeps his eyes on the path. I'm not sure if he's trying to scare me or if he's scared himself, but either way, I start to feel it too, that pressure in the back of my skull, like something squeezing. We reach this spot, and Travis just stops, points his flashlight at a boulder where a red backpack's slumped like somebody just left it. Everything was still inside. A sandwich, a notebook with scribbled words I couldn't read, a half-empty bottle of water. It's like the guy just walked away mid-bite. This is where they found him, Travis whispers, like he's scared to even say it out loud. Or didn't find him, I guess. Then he shines his light up the rock face, and there they are. Dozens of them. Little stick figures scratched into the stone. But not like the harmless ones you draw as a kid. These were different. Jagged. Wrong. My mouth goes dry, but I force out a, "Who the hell did this?" And that's when I see it. Just past Travis's shoulder. A shape, tall and thin, standing between the trees. Watching. "Hey, Travis, you see..." But he's already turned pale, staring right at them. Don't look," he mutters, voice like it's breaking. And then I see them too. Not just one, but 3. No, more. Black shapes against the moonlight, taller than any person, just standing there. Silent. I wanted to turn away, but it was like my feet were locked in place. And then Travis grabs my arm, nails digging in. "Mark, we gotta go," he stammers, pulling me, but I couldn't take my eyes off them. They weren't moving, not even swaying in the wind, but I felt them inching closer all the same. We don't walk back. We run. And it's that kind of run where your legs don't feel like they're attached to your body, where every step feels like you're wading through water. When we finally get back to his truck, Travis is panting like he's gonna be sick. I'm just staring into the woods, expecting to see those figures burst out any second. Did you see her?" Travis whispers, his voice shaking. "The woman? She was smiling at me." I didn't see any woman, but before I could even ask, I glanced in the side mirror. There, standing right behind us, pale as a ghost, hair matted against her face, eyes that seemed off, like they were too big, too black. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then that smile, it wasn't a smile. It was more like her mouth was just too wide. We got the hell out of there. We didn't talk the whole drive back. Couldn't. Travis was shaking so bad he could barely keep his hands on the wheel, and I wasn't doing much better. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I couldn't shake her face. It was burned into my head. The next morning, I did some digging, like any good journalist would, right? That's when I stumbled on the legends, the Dark Watchers. Been around since before anyone even set foot here. But no one ever talks about them. Not really. Just whispers. Like they're afraid saying the name will make them show up. I couldn't leave it alone, though. I went back. Alone this time. And yeah, that was stupid. I took a different trail, one that led up to a ridgeline, thinking maybe I'd get a better view. But as the sun dipped behind the hills, I felt it again. That cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, and there she was, right in front of me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I couldn't move. She reached out, her fingers brushing my cheek, and I felt empty. Just gone. "You shouldn't have looked," she whispered. Her voice was like gravel grinding against bone. I stumbled back, tripped over my own feet, and hit the ground hard. When I looked up, she was gone. But they weren't. Lining the ridgeline, dozens of them, just watching. I made it back to my truck somehow, drove until I hit the highway and didn't look back. Called Travis, but no answer. The next day, they said he'd gone missing. Just vanished. I tried telling people, but no one believed me. They just looked at me like I was losing it. Maybe I am. But every time I try to forget, I see them out of the corner of my eye. I hear them, whispering, always whispering. So if you're out there, in the hills, and you feel that itch on your skin like you're being watched, just keep walking. Don't look back. Because once you do, they never let you go. And right now, they're outside. I can hear them, and they know I'm still looking. It was early October, that awkward in-between season. Not too warm, but not cold either. We had just moved into this old Victorian house on Primrose Street in Quitman, Arkansas. My name's Finn Layton. I'm 34, work in construction, and figured this house was a fresh start for me, my wife Leah, and our daughter Tess. She's 10 and was stoked about finally having her own space. The house was a faded yellow, paint peeling like old wallpaper, with a sagging porch that felt like it might collapse under its own weight. It looked sad, like it was waiting for someone to breathe life back into it. An old oak tree out front cast weird shadows on the cracked windows, and a rusty swing set creaked in the yard, untouched for ages. "Welcome to our fixer-upper," I joked, trying to lighten the mood as we stepped inside. But the moment we did, I felt it. A chill. The kind that makes you shiver even in fall. Leah shot me a look. "Finn, did you leave the windows open?" "We don't even have windows in the kitchen," I muttered, trying to shake it off. As we unpacked, Tess came bounding down the stairs with this ragged teddy bear she'd found in her closet. "Can I keep him, Dad?" Her eyes sparkled with hope. "Sure, kiddo," I said, not thinking much of it. "He's probably just lonely." But when I looked closer, I saw one of its eyes was gone, and the fur was matted like it had seen things. The first night, around 2:15 a.m., I was jolted awake by a scratching sound. Not loud, but enough to pull me from sleep. I scanned the room, thinking it was the branches scraping the window. But no, the sound was coming from inside. "Leah, did you hear that?" I whispered. She just mumbled in her sleep, rolled over. I told myself I was being paranoid, that old houses make strange noises. But deep down, I knew something was off. The next morning, we met Mrs. Dalton, our neighbor. She was this frail old woman, gray hair and sunken cheeks. When I mentioned the house, her eyes widened, and she crossed herself. "You should have never moved in there," she said, voice low. "That's where Dog Boy lived." "Dog Boy?" I chuckled, thinking she was joking, but she shook her head. "Gerald Bettis. They locked him up in that house. Said he was born wrong, like something crawled out of a nightmare. Did things to animals. Even did things to his parents before they found them dead." I laughed it off, but that night I couldn't stop thinking about her words. As I lay in bed, the air felt heavier, pressing down on me. And then I heard it again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I grabbed my flashlight and tiptoed down the hall. The sound was coming from Tess's room. My stomach dropped as I reached for the doorknob. I pushed it open slowly, and there was Tess, on all fours, scratching at the floor. "Tess?" I whispered, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up, and I swear her eyes weren't hers anymore. Just dark pools, like she was looking through me. "He's coming, Daddy," she whispered. "Dog Boy's coming." I yanked her up, shaking her. "Tess, wake up!" But she just giggled, this high-pitched laugh that echoed unnaturally. Finally, she blinked like she'd woken from a dream. "Daddy, what's wrong?" she asked. her voice small and scared. After that, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a baseball bat, straining to hear every creak and groan, convinced something was about to crawl out of the darkness. The next morning, I told Leah, but she brushed it off. "You're just tired, Finn. It's a new house." 2 nights later, it happened again. The scratching was louder, frantic. I found Leah at the kitchen table, head tilted at an odd angle, eyes rolled back, nails digging into the wood. "Leah?" My heart raced. She snapped around, and I'll never forget that look, like I was nothing, like I was prey. "He's hungry," she hissed, voice not her own. "He wants to play." I stumbled back, tripping over a chair. That's when I saw him, crawling out of the shadows, tall and thin, with matted hair hanging over his face. He wore a torn hospital gown, fingers twisted like claws. I froze. He lifted his head, and I saw his eyes, dark and empty. He grinned, showing jagged teeth, moving toward me, slow and deliberate, savoring it. "Finn!" Leah screamed, snapping me out of it. I grabbed her and we bolted, dragging Tess behind us. We didn't stop running until we hit the street, gasping for air. The next day, we went back to grab our things, but the house felt different. It smelled like wet dog, and the walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. Tess's teddy bear lay in her room, torn apart, stuffing everywhere. Carved into the floor next to her bed was a name: Gerald. We left that day, left everything behind. I sold the house to the first buyer, didn't care about the price. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up and hear it, the scratching, faint, like it's coming from deep inside the walls. Last week, I got a call from Mrs. Dalton. "You need to come back," she whispered. "There's something you left behind." I didn't want to go, but I had to know. When I got there, the front door stood wide open. In the middle of the living room was Tess's teddy bear, and written in blood across the walls were 4 words: "Dog boy wants to play." I'm leaving this as a warning. Don't go to that house. Don't listen to the scratching, because once you hear it, once you feel it, he'll never let you go. And as I write this, I hear him outside my window, scratching, waiting. August 18th, 2023. I didn't think much of it when Jen first mentioned Riverdale Road. We'd been talking about doing something different, something to break the monotony, but I figured it'd be something tame, maybe a day trip to the mountains, not chasing ghosts at midnight. But there she was, waving her phone in front of me, an article pulled up about Colorado's most haunted road, her grin daring me to back out. "Come on, Mark," she prodded, tilting her head, her ponytail brushing her shoulder. "You said you wanted to try something exciting for once." I stared at her for a long second. "Fine," I muttered, shrugging, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing me hesitate. "But we're just driving. No weird rituals or stopping for selfies, okay? Deal?" She flashed that smile, the one that always felt like a challenge, and we were out the door within minutes. By 11:45 p.m., we were on the road, my beat-up Ford rattling more than usual. The air was thick and sticky, like Denver couldn't make up its mind if it wanted to rain or not. The sky was clear, though, moonlight spilling over everything in that eerie, bluish way that makes shadows look deeper than they really are. The entrance to Riverdale Road snuck up on us, hidden behind a bend. No streetlights, barely any signs, just asphalt and darkness swallowing everything ahead. Jen leaned forward, holding her phone up to capture the first glimpses. "Did you know there's a mansion that used to be out here?" she murmured, her voice hushed. like we weren't the only ones listening. Guy went mad, killed his family, then burned it all to the ground. They say he still walks this road, looking for them. I didn't respond, but my grip tightened on the steering wheel. Maybe it was nerves, or maybe it was just the way the mist started rolling in out of nowhere, making it hard to see. It was probably just a coincidence, but my chest tightened, each beat growing heavier, like my heart was about to burst through my ribs. And that's when we saw her, a figure right in the middle of the road. "Mark," Jen's voice wavered, barely above a whisper. "Do you see that?" "Yeah," I muttered, squinting. I slowed the truck to a crawl, headlights bathing her in a harsh yellow glow. She was wearing a nightgown, torn, dirty, and her hair was plastered across her face, wet like she'd just pulled herself out of a river. For a second, everything felt like it stopped. Just this woman, alone, staring at us through the darkness. And then she moved, snapping her head up so quickly it made my breath hitch. Her eyes, they weren't eyes, just darkness, deep and endless, like staring into a void. "Mark, go!" Jen's voice cut through the moment, sharp, desperate. I slammed on the gas, the truck swerving around the woman, tires screeching against the pavement. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Gone. As if she'd never been there. "What the hell was that?" Jen's hand was clamped around my forearm, her nails digging into my skin. "I don't know," I said, my voice catching. "I told you this was a bad idea." We hit a bend, and that's when the orange light started flickering through the trees, glowing faintly on the left side of the road. "Is that a fire?" Jen whispered, her eyes locked on it. "Don't even think about it," I warned, but she was already unbuckling her seatbelt, slipping out of the truck before I could stop her. "Jen!" I cursed, grabbing the flashlight from the glove compartment. The air outside was heavy, and there was this metallic tang, like lightning was about to strike. We pushed through the trees, branches clawing at our clothes, until we stumbled into a clearing. There it was, the mansion, or what was left of it. Crumbling walls, charred beams, like something out of a nightmare. And in the center, drawn into the dirt, was a circle, candles flickering around the edges. "Jen, let's go," I urged, a pit opening in my stomach, leaving me cold and weightless. But she was staring at a massive, cracked mirror leaning against one of the ruined walls. "Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing. I followed her gaze, and my pulse raced, thudding so hard I thought everyone around me could hear it. There were shadows in the mirror, 2 figures standing behind us, just outside the circle. "Jen, don't move." My voice was tight, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. The figures shifted, the low, ragged noise of their chanting filling the air. It was deep, rough, like something trying to speak through gravel. It crawled under my skin, every syllable vibrating in my bones. "They're getting closer," Jen whimpered, stepping back. I spun around, and there they were, 2 men draped in black hooded robes, faces hidden, the candlelight flickering off the pale, scarred skin of their hands. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing her arm, but one of them lunged forward, his fingers curling around her wrist. His nails, they were long, sharp, like claws, digging into her skin. "Mark!" she screamed, and everything blurred. I don't even remember how we got back to the truck. One moment we were in that ruined mansion, and the next, I was slamming the door shut, Jen crumpled beside me, blood dripping from her nose. My chest tightened with each beat, heavier and heavier, until I thought I'd choke. I hit the gas, tires spinning on the wet dirt, and tore down Riverdale Road, not daring to look back until we hit the highway. By then, Jen wasn't moving. Jen? I shook her, panic rising, and her eyes fluttered open, tears streaking down her cheeks. "We need to go," she whispered, voice cracked, raw. "They're still watching." I didn't say anything, just drove until the city lights swallowed us up. Weeks passed, and Jen wouldn't talk about it. She wouldn't sleep, wouldn't eat, just kept saying, "They're still there. They're waiting." And then, one morning, she was gone. No note, no call, just gone. I went back once, months later. Found myself standing in front of that mansion, half expecting her to be there. But everything was gone. No circle, no candles, no mirror. Just one thing left scratched into the brick wall, so faint I almost missed it. "The gate is open." I don't drive down Riverdale Road anymore, but sometimes, when it's late and I'm alone, I still hear that chanting, deep and rough, like something's trying to speak through gravel. And every now and then, when I glance in the mirror, I swear I see them, those two figures, watching from the shadows, waiting. It was one of those nights that wraps around you, tight and suffocating. November 8th, 2023, out in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. The chill had a way of crawling under your skin, and the dampness hung in the air like a warning. I was driving down Route 72, headed to Joe's cabin. He called earlier, something about noises creeping around his place. Joe's always been a bit on edge, but he never asked me to come out this late. Probably had one too many drinks, I thought, but I couldn't just ignore him. Tossed on my old leather jacket, the one that barely held together, and grabbed my flashlight before hitting the road. Joe's cabin is hidden, about 5 miles off the main drag, deep in the woods. You'd miss the turn if you weren't paying attention. That night, the fog clung to everything. My headlights barely cut through it. All I saw were the towering pines swaying like they were whispering secrets to each other. I parked at his place around 11:30 p.m. The cabin looked like something out of a nightmare. Old wood, sagging roof, and a porch light flickering like it was trying to warn me away. "Joe?" I called, but nothing answered back. Probably asleep, I figured. The moment my boots hit the ground, something felt off. The quiet was thick, too heavy. Then, from the dark, I heard it. A soft sobbing. It was high-pitched, almost a whisper carried on the wind, and it made the hair on my neck stand on end. "Joe?" I called out, louder this time, trying to shake off the creeping unease. Still no answer. I spotted the front door, ajar and swaying like it was trying to let me in. I stepped onto the porch, heart hammering, and just as I reached for the door, the crying stopped. Dead silence. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air smelled like old wood and something stale. Flicked on my flashlight, scanning the room, and that's when I saw them. Joe's boots, right in the middle of the living room, mud splattered everywhere. There was a wet trail leading from the door to the back, like something had been dragged across the floor. My pulse quickened. This didn't feel right. "Joe?" I called again, my voice echoing in the emptiness. Then I heard it, a raspy whisper from just behind me. "Help me!" I spun around, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness, landing on Joe. He was crouched down, his back to me, wearing that same old denim jacket, head tilted weirdly, like he was listening to something only he could hear. "Joe! What the hell?" I took a step closer, but he didn't move. "Joe?" My voice dropped to a whisper. When I touched his shoulder, he jerked around. I swear, I'll never shake the image from my mind. His eyes, Gone, just hollow sockets, blood trickling down his cheeks. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then he screamed. This sound, like he was being torn apart. I stumbled back, falling over the coffee table, scrambling away. And just like that, it was silent. Joe collapsed, twitching, then lay still. I was frozen, breathing hard, flashlight rolling under the couch. I fumbled, hands shaking, until I finally grabbed it. When I flicked it on, he was gone. Just gone. No blood, no body. Only that muddy trail leading outside. I should have left. But something pulled me in. An urge to find him, to not leave him like this. Against every instinct, I followed that trail. It led me out the back, through the tall grass, into the woods. The deeper I went, the colder it got. The fog twisted around me, like it was alive. Every few steps, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Nothing there. Then I spotted it. A rusted well, half buried, a broken cover hanging off one side. The trail led right to it. I stepped closer, breath hitching, and there it was again, the faint sobbing, from inside the well. "Joe?" I whispered, peering over the edge. That's when a hand, cold and clammy, shot up, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, tried to pull back, but it held on, dragging me closer. I saw its face, twisted, hollow eyes, mouth too wide. And it spoke, voice almost like Joe's. "You shouldn't have come here." I yanked my arm free, stumbling back, falling hard. I looked up. Nothing. Just the wind whispering through the trees, the well standing there, silent. I didn't waste time. I ran. I didn't stop until I hit my truck, heart racing, lungs burning. I jumped in, started it up, and tore down that dirt road. By the time I hit the main road, I was soaked in sweat, hands trembling. Just one glance in the rearview mirror. And there he was, Joe, or whatever was left of him, standing at the edge of the trees. Eyes black, mouth stretched into a grin. I never went back to that cabin. Tried calling Joe's number, straight to voicemail every time. Went to the cops, but they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of struggle. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right, I still hear that whisper. "Help me." And I can't shake the feeling he's still out there, waiting for someone else to come looking. It was one of those October nights when the cold sank right into your bones. The date, October 28th, 2021, sticks with me, like a scar you can't stop running your fingers over. I'm Mark Jensen, and this is a story I swore I'd never tell again. But maybe, by putting it out there, I can finally forget how it all began off the coast of Cape Henlopen. I'm a marine biologist, used to spending long hours on boats, studying ocean currents and the life they carry. But that night wasn't about research. It was about the corpse light, a story whispered among locals, the kind you dismiss until you're out there under a bruised sky with nothing but darkness around you. The wind cut right through us as we boarded. The Endeavor. There were 6 of us, mostly seasoned scientists, plus a couple of interns, eager and wide-eyed. The younger one, Jamie, kept fidgeting with his camera, muttering about how cool this was going to be. I didn't have the heart to tell him otherwise. My gut had been churning all day, but I figured it was just nerves. Superstitions weren't supposed to have a place in science, right? We set out just as the sun dipped below the horizon, and everything felt off, like the sea had been waiting. By the time 11 p.m. hit, the fog had wrapped around us thick as a noose, and we couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Then there it was, the corpse light, flickering out there on the water. Pale, cold. It didn't belong. Jamie leaned over the rail, snapping photos like it was just another data point. "Look, Mark, isn't it amazing?" "Yeah," I muttered. But it wasn't amazing. It was wrong. "Let's get closer," I suggested, even though every part of me screamed to turn back. We moved in slowly, the light pulsing with this eerie rhythm, almost like it was breathing. And as we edged nearer, the fog swallowed up everything around us, turning our world into a damp, endless void. Then, the engine cut out. Just like that, no warning. We were adrift in silence. Jamie fumbled with the controls, panic setting in, but there was nothing. No power, no connection. Just that damned light getting brighter and brighter, washing everything in this sickly, pale glow. "Guys, something's not right," I managed to get out. I couldn't even hear myself over the rush of blood in my ears. Then came the sound. Deep, raw, like something clawing up from the pit of hell itself. Jamie's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. What is that?" he stammered. And just as I was about to answer, I saw them. Shadows, just under the water's surface, moving closer. Not shadows. Bodies. They drifted, lifeless but reaching, their hands stretching up, fingers twisted like claws. "Back! Everyone! Get back!" I shouted, but it was already too late. Jamie was frozen, eyes locked on something just beyond the boat, and then he was gone. 1 minute standing, the next yanked down into the black water, his scream cut short by the waves. It wasn't a scream that haunted me, though. It was his face, the look in his eyes as he went under, like he knew right then that we were all just another story for this cursed place. The others scrambled for the lifeboat. I don't remember getting in, just the feel of the oars in my hands, the blisters forming as we paddled. The light still hung there, brighter than ever, and the moaning, it grew louder, almost like a song, something old and desperate. I glanced back, just once, and I saw them. All those bodies, hundreds maybe, bobbing in the waves, their faces pale and empty, mouths open in silent screams. And in the center, the light pulsed, drawing them in, just like it had drawn us. We paddled until our arms went numb. And then, nothing. No light, no fog, no figures in the water. Just silence, stretching out forever. By the time I hit the shore, the sun was just starting to rise, a sliver of light breaking the horizon. I stumbled out, fell to my knees in the wet sand, and just stared back out at the ocean. The Endeavor was gone. My team, gone. I should have gone to the police, to anyone who'd listen. But what could I say? That we'd chased a ghost light and paid the price? Instead, I drove home, hands shaking so bad I almost ran off the road a dozen times. I told myself it was over, that I'd forget. But I don't sleep much anymore, and when I do, I dream of that light. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and the world feels distant, I hear it. That low, ragged moaning. And I know it's still out there, waiting for the next fool to follow its glow. All these stories around a campfire at midnight seem to me as a little boy a bunch of nothing. The stuff of legend, said to scare you straight back into bed from playing in the woods in the dead of night or too far from home. Monsters and goblins and demons. Bah. All hogwash, I always assumed. Until 2024. Suddenly, now, I'm not so sure about that. I don't believe in anything supernatural. However, something has definitely changed within our town, and it's real enough to have even the most skeptical people lock up before night comes. And it all began a few months ago when people started talking about things that hadn't been mentioned for years. I remember it was a cold January night. I was in the yard with my dog trying to get her to pee before bed. The sky was crystal clear. This kind of night when every star feels punched up, even polished. But the air, it felt heavy, wrong. Some sort of stillness clung to it, like everyone was holding its breath. Even the dog had been acting off, sniffing around, whining like she smelled something she didn't like. Then I heard it. A low, raspy growl from behind my house, out of the woods. I aimed my flashlight on the trees. For that split second, I thought I saw something moving. Something tall, bony, and unnatural. But by the time I blinked, it had disappeared. I immediately thought at first that it was just nothing, maybe just some stray coyote animal. Of course, inside I knew better. Before long, the rest of the small town found out too. And livestock began to disappear. Cows, chickens, sheep, all dead. Mangled, as if something had spent some time with them. At first, everyone assumed that a wolf or mountain lion was the working killer, but the sightings started. It was Jimmy, out by the old Peterson place, who was the first to see it. Jimmy was out late checking on his cattle when he would spot the thing near the barn. Said it was hunched over one of his cows, its long, bony fingers digging into the flesh like it was pulling it apart. Jimmy swears up and down that it wasn't no animal, not nothing he'd ever seen before. It was hairless, he says, his voice trembling slightly as he speaks. Skin pale as death. Arms and legs all wrong, too long, too thin. And its eyes. Jesus, those eyes. They were black, like bottomless pits. It looked at me, just stared, like it was sizing me up. Jimmy ran. He blinks for a second, then goes back with his rifle, and the thing is gone. There's the cow dead in bits and pieces strewn across the field like some sort of sick art project. People began locking their doors and herding their children indoors when the sun had set. That didn't stop it, though. It didn't care how many locks you had or how many lights you left on in your home. It could get in. I wanted to tell you how I didn't believe Jimmy and how he was just getting worked up by imagination. But I knew it was real. I just didn't want to admit to it. Not that night. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I'd lain there, twiddling my toes, more or less tossed about, tossing and turning, when I heard it. That same low growl, as if something were scratching its nails across the walls. I sprang up and grabbed my trusty baseball bat, which I kept under my bed, my heart thumping in my chest. Again, it grew silent. Too silent. Even the dog froze there in the corner, ears pinned back, eyes wide with fear. Then I began hearing the creak of steps, measured, deliberate, like someone or maybe something was walking right outside my window. I crept forward, bat in hand, and peeked through the blinds. And here it was, the rake. Good God, it was real. There, in the corner of my own yard, under a bright streetlight just like Jimmy'd told me. Hairless, bony, with limbs impossibly long for its body, and those eyes, such cold black suckers that seemed to suck the light right out of the air. It looked at me, locked on like it knew I was watching, and then it smiled. That was when I heard the tapping, a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the glass. My stomach dropped. This wasn't outside anymore. It was at the window. I turned, and there it was, pressed up against the glass, its face twisted into the most horrific grin I've ever seen. Its fingers, long and sharp, scratched against the pane, making that same God-forsaken noise. It didn't make a sound, just stared at me, waiting. I'm not sure what happened after that. I guess I passed out or something, because the last thing I remember is waking up on the floor with still clutching the bat in my hand. My window was broken, and the glass was scattered all over the floor, and my dog was nowhere to be found. That night changed me. I tried to tell what I saw to all the people around, but nobody believed me. Not at first, that is. However, since livestock started disappearing and people living in the town started witnessing very strange things, the people of the town started noticing. Of course, the police arrived, setting up patrols, scouring the woods, looking for a glimpse of the monster. But whenever it got that close, the creature seemed to vanish in the shadows and slink away, as if it had never been there in the first place. And they discovered tracks-long, spindly footprints that belonged to no animal they'd ever seen. Then the mystery disappearances began. There was, first, Old Man Harris. He lived way out at the edge of town, near the woods. It was his wife who arose to find their front door standing open wide and Harris gone. Only slippers were by the front door, and bloodstains led into the trees. The next, Bethany Jacobs, a teenager who'd gone out with friends one night. Her car abandoned on the side of the road, passenger door ripped off and blood spattered across the dashboard. No sign of Bethany. Poof. Gone. Panic set in among the whole town. People started boarding up all their windows. They were leaving the town in droves. No police patrolling made anyone feel secure. I ran. I packed, loaded goods into the car, left. And yet, no matter where I went, it was there and behind my back there, stalking me, waiting for that one perfect moment to strike. One evening, I was driving down back roads trying to outpace the fear inside my head when something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. It was only my mind playing tricks on me. It must have been, I thought. But then, I saw it again. This time, a good-looking figure, pale and thin, running behind my car, more rapid than any human can ever run. It was the rake. I floored it, wrapping my hands so tautly around the steering wheel that I felt like I was going to snap the thing in half. But no matter how fast I went, it kept pace, closing in on me until it was almost right there, its hands slapping against the back window, its face flattened up against the glass, and that mouth of twisted teeth glowering back at me. Then, as quickly as it had set in, it was away again. I slammed the car hard on the brakes and pulled onto the side of the road. Heart racing inside me, I sat there for what felt like hours, too terrified to move or breathe. I raised my eyes. Sun was out. I did not find the rake, but I knew that this had only just begun. And nowhere is safe. The town was almost deserted now. They are afraid to stay, though seldom people spoke of what's happening. They keep to themselves and lock their doors and pray for the rake not to come for them. But I know better. It is out there. It's hungry. You can run, you can hide, but the rake will always find you. Ever have that feeling? Like something's watching you? Not when you're being paranoid and it's just turned out you walked past the Joneses' house and saw a shadow behind the curtains. I mean, when you know it's out there. waiting for you, watching you. I used to think that was all in my head until it wasn't. All of it starts with that hot and wet summer night in Enfield, Illinois. Nothing ever really happens here, not until that summer. 1973. I was a kid then, about 10 or 11 years old, living with my mom in this small house on the edge of town. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and you hear the same stories so many times you cease to believe in anything. That was the year people started to realize it. My first thought was thinking of all those stupid gossips going on in the small town where I live. Each story claimed to be true. Just 2 doors away, I had a neighbor named Henry Thompson. That was the guy who started saying it. If Henry said he's got something weird in his backyard, nobody paid much attention to him because he's always been a bit weird all around. He was getting late at night, checking on his dog when he saw it. 3 legs, 2 short little arms, and big pink eyes. The damn thing stood about 4 feet tall, grayish-colored, and moved fast, he'd said. I remember laughing when I first heard it. A monster with 3 legs? Come on. And soon, more people started seeing it too. My mother told me that I should stay indoors after dark. Just precautionary, she said. But her voice and eyes told differently. She didn't believe that some escaped kangaroo or ape caused the news. No way. And then, one night, I found for myself. It was late. I couldn't sleep. Heat was awful, and cicadas outside buzzed like the world vibrated. I got up and tried my best to sneak around my mom's room. I slipped out the back door. It wasn't in me, really, to break rules, but I did need some air to cool down. I sat myself out back, looking out across the woods beyond our house. The moonlight did not penetrate the trees. Instead, it cast odd shadows. I listened to soft, unnatural rustling through leaves as the wind blew across. Everything was off. It is when I heard it. Scratching was made like something dragging its body through the underbrush. I froze. My heart begins pounding in my chest. I can feel it is going to pop. And my arms push forward, eyes focused into the blackness in front of me. Then I saw it. That thing everybody had been talking about. It was slouching on its front, right down close to the ground, sniffing at something. Those pink eyes. Lord, those eyes. They were shining like 2 flashlights moving across the trees, jerky, unnatural movements. And the legs, 3 of them, as Henry said, moving in this stiffish, twitchy sort of way. And its arms, these short little things, barely were able to reach its chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The rest of me was cold, and all I could do was just sit here and watch. And then, as it had bloomed, it turned. When its eyes came lighted, I think on this day swearing to God, this wicked, grinning stretch of its mouth with jagged, sharp-edged teeth across its face. It charged at me. Not much after that do I remember. It's just running sprinting back into the house, slams the door closed. I must have yelled because my mom came running into the house and asked me what in God's name is going on. I couldn't utter a word. My throat was parched, my body shaking like leaves. All I could do was point in the direction of the window. But by the time she looked, it was gone. First of all, she wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself, but I knew what I was seeing and knew that thing was out there watching. Weeks turned into weeks, and nothing happened. The story of Enfield Monster faded from people's minds as they were convinced it was just some wild creature or an imagination product. I knew more. I felt it every night. The full view from my windows of those woods kept me waiting every night to see pink eyes appear again. And one night, they did. It was late, probably around midnight. I could not sleep for anything. The fear ensured that I would never sleep well again. I looked out the window, and there it was, shining pink eyes staring straight into me from the edge of the trees. It didn't move that time either. It just watched. I tried to scream, but my voice refused to come. My chest constricted, my heart thudding painfully in my rib cage. Then it starts to move slowly, as if it were sizing me up, gauging my response to see how close it could get before I take off. I was stuck. All I could do was just sit there, watch while it came closer. Closer to the sill of my window, those eyes. Not pink, really. Just true, throbbing with some otherworldly glow. And that grin. That god-awful smile reappeared. It pressed its face into the glass. For a second, I thought it was going through. And then it snapped. Just. Stood there, inches from me. Heavy breathing, fogging up the window with every exhalation. Then, having tossed its head back one last time in amusement, it turned and disappeared back into the woods. And then I couldn't stand it anymore the following night. I told my mother about everything and begged her to believe me to do something. And she finally listened. The next day we packed up and we left town. But no one ever finished with me. Sometimes, during my sleep, I see those eyes in my dream in the darkness of my room at night. They are always present, waiting and lurking. In hushed tones, people still whisper about the Enfield Monster, laughing it off as if it were some long-forgotten legend of an urban fantasy. But I'm in the know. It's true, and it is still standing.